Welcome to the Feed Your Family Tonight podcast. Do you dread hearing the question, what's for dinner? Whether you spend your days keeping up with toddlers, running kids to after-school activities, or juggling a career and family, getting dinner on the table can be a struggle for us all. I'm Mariefiebach, a business owner, wife, and mom of 4. I'm on a mission to build stronger families one dinner at a time, and I'm here with tips, tricks, and inspiration you need to feed your family tonight. Hello, friends. Welcome to the Feed Your Family Tonight podcast, episode 160. I'm your host, Mariefiebach, and this week we have a replay episode. It is Thanksgiving week, and to be honest with you, I'm taking 1 week off from podcasting so that I can spend a little bit more time with my family. This replay is my on-air coaching call with my friend Janice, and it is full of little nuggets of wisdom that you can use in your home to make dinner just a little bit easier. If you are interested in ever joining me for an on-air coaching call, I have to tell you that I love doing on-air coaching calls. It is so much fun and it's super easy. There's a short application at feedyourfamilytonight.com/apply. If you're interested and want to come on, we can talk about some of your family dinner challenges and help you come up with a couple of small little tweaks that might make your life easier. So for now, friends, have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Know that at Feed Your Family Tonight, I believe in creating connection with people you love around the table. And the Thanksgiving table can be a wonderful place to do that. So my wish for you is that you have just a small little moment of connection with someone that you care about over Thanksgiving. Enjoy your friends, enjoy your family, and we'll catch you next week for a brand new episode of the podcast. Take care. Janice Scholl, welcome to the Feed Your Family Tonight podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. We met last year when you were hosting the Money, Career, and Motherhood Summit, and we've kind of stayed in touch. And I was posting in my Feed Your Family Tonight Facebook group, asking people about what some of their dinner time challenges were, and you responded. And that's how we got you here today. But before we kind of dig into that, I want to know, tell me about your family and tell me about what dinner time is like in your home.
So I'm a mother of 2. We have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, and I'm married. So there are 4 of us who live outside of Nashville, and dinner time for us is a challenge, I will say. We have, my husband tries to be a part of dinner times when he can, but due to his work schedule, sometimes he is or isn't available. But when the 4 of us eat together, I feel like we all have different variations of the same meal. So we're a family, like, if we're going to have tacos, we're the assembly where everybody gets to build your own meal, because I've got 2 kids who are really picky eaters. And then on top of that, we have 1 child with life-threatening food allergies. And my husband and I also both happen to have some less severe food allergies. So we're layering on the dietary needs of each individual, as well as the kind of pickiness factor, if you will. And because of the severity of our 1 child's dietary limits, I do cook a ton. So, and I also want to add, one more important factor.
Keep going.
We lived overseas for 5 years, and this is important because my kids' tastes are a little different than probably the average American kids. Like, they still love chicken tenders and fries, but they also love made Japanese ramen. And so I cook a lot from scratch. I cater to different needs. And then there's kind of the who's eating at the dinner table today factor as well.
That's a lot. That's really exhausting as a mom, isn't it?
It is.
I talked in one of my episodes on the emotional burden of feeding your family and how I'm trying to take care of the different nutritional needs of my children. We have one food intolerance that we have to work around in our home, but we don't have life-threatening allergies. And when you're dealing with life-threatening allergies, you have to read labels like a scientist and sometimes have to dig in deeper where it may not even say it on the label, but you know that that particular ingredient is sometimes derived from another ingredient. Do you mind sharing what the specific allergies are that you're dealing with?
Yep. And I'll explain a little bit about how it impacts us as well, because our daughter's allergies have changed over years. So today she is allergic to peanuts, all tree nuts, chickpeas, and pea. In the past, she was allergic to dairy, soy, egg, shellfish, and peanut. That was where she was when she was really young, and she grew out of all of those original allergies except for the peanut, which she grew into, if you will. That one was actually not a severe allergy, but now is a severe allergy for her. And so not only are we trying to manage food allergies that we know about, because they've changed over time, like chickpea and pea are relatively new to us. And it took us years to really figure out that she was reacting to those because she was eating them on a regular basis and not having a life-threatening reaction, having a different type of reaction. So there's the reading the ingredients, and then there's reading your child, because if you have a child who is an allergic type child, we would have instances where she just wouldn't feel good after she ate. So that's reading the child. And then what I really came to was cooking from scratch and knowing what exactly is in our food is often better than us trying to buy things that kind of are quick serve type foods, just because sometimes she might not feel well afterwards. And we really don't know, even if it's not a direct allergy, we don't know what type of challenge, like intolerance, she's reacting to. So for us, it's the life-threatening factor is huge because we have to avoid cross-contamination. And then also having that, we just do better knowing all of the ingredients that go into our food and keeping our processed foods to a minimum, because then we know which ones work, is what's best for our family.
Oh my goodness. I totally know that you are not alone. I have a dear, dear friend whose children have a genetic disorder that they can continue to get allergic to more and more things. So they have to be very careful to be constantly adding variety outside of the allergens that they cannot have. And so I understand a piece of what you're facing with that, especially as your daughter's allergies have adapted, and that constant vigilance of you're constantly calculating in the back of your head, how did they feel after they ate this? We're trying a different kind of bean. Are we going to have trouble with this bean? Is it in the same family as the peas and the chickpeas and all of those things? Because peas and chickpeas are in two different families, because the chickpea is a legume and a pea is not. Is that correct?
So it's not uncommon to have, if you have a peanut allergy, it's not uncommon to have a chickpea. And then peas, it's not uncommon to have a legume reaction, right? So we know different categories. If she's going to react to one allergen, it is possible that she will more likely that she will react to another. But sometimes it's also not the first time you eat it. So you want to eat the variety and you want your kid to be exposed to all these different foods, but that vigilance doesn't go away. So it's planning because we have this allergy today, what is possible that we could react to in the future. Like one thing that I just learned about a week ago, I think, was because we have tree nut allergies. So cashew is one of our allergies. Pink peppercorn is actually related to cashew. So I went to a spice store and was asking them about their process to avoid cross-contamination. And they were educating me on how they wanted us to know that anything with the pink peppercorns were unavailable to us, wouldn't be a good choice. So it's, understanding the correlations of allergies is an additional layer of complexity.
So let's kind of talk about what would be your dream scenario for a dinner in your home? What would be like the perfect situation? And then maybe we can find a way to get you a little closer to that. So tell me about what would make a dream dinner in your home.
So, and I will tell you, I actually do enjoy cooking. I like to do it. I like to eat food that we create as a family. And so it's not that I don't want to spend my time cooking, but definitely I have some room for improvement on two ways. One, in my perfect world, the four of us would eat the same meal. And
Yes.
that can look a little different. Like I said, tacos are one where we're technically eating the same thing, but different people are picking different things to put on their food and mixing it in different ways, I guess. Just kind of like that assembly line taco style. But I'd like us to literally sit down and eat a meal together that was exactly the same. And then the majority of the reason why I want that is because of the cleanup. This is my biggest challenge, is that when you're catering to so many different tastes and, needs of each person, it causes me to make lots of mess in the kitchen. Like, there's so many different pots, there's so many different plates, there's just so much to clean up afterwards. So I'd love to have us all eat the same thing, but the real reason I want that is because I want to streamline the process and shorten the cleanup too.
Okay, let me ask you a couple of questions. Are you serving plates from the stove or from the counter, or are you putting it in bowls and passing it family style?
So it depends on the meal. And honestly, on the busy nights, we're probably just doing it like from the stove.
Okay. But other nights you do actually put it on the table. That's one of my first tips. That is something that I do in my home, is that I have stopped passing food at the table, and I serve the plates from the stove, because that cuts the dishes in half. Now, again, tacos, we actually had tacos last night for dinner, and I'm putting some of the condiments in bowls and passing around the table, and then some they're just fixing. But that's one little tip. Tell me about the picky eaters and what things the picky eaters prefer or don't prefer.
So meat seems to be fine. We're okay with meat. We are not okay with vegetables. And we don't like thick sauces. So that is really, any food where, like I have this dream of the lasagna and different iterations of that, or like casseroles. We will actually eat lasagna because tomato sauce is deemed fine for the pickiest of our members. But, any other form of casserole seems to be really hard. So like these one dish meal ideas just don't happen.
Tell me about vegetables. The ones that do not prefer vegetables, do they prefer the vegetables that they will eat? Will they eat them cooked or raw? Is there a difference? Is there a certain category of vegetables, like you think about like the cauliflower and the broccoli, and they're like, that all tastes like cabbage and I'm not going to touch it? Tell me about what they will eat or what they are strongly averse to.
Yeah. So the pickiest is strongly averse to anything green. We're just going to start there. So it's lettuce, it's broccoli. We can get them to choke down a little bit of lettuce, but broccoli is definitely a challenge. So, spaghetti is definitely, so I have to do the hiding. I'm trying to hide some vegetables in the food for our child that just really can't see it. The only green thing he eats is seaweed. So back to that, we lived overseas. He loves seaweed, but we can't get him to eat a broccoli to save our lives.
That's so interesting. And seaweed has such a strong flavor. Does he like the seaweed because it's usually like salty or crunchy, or what does he like about the seaweed, do you think?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, because I don't think it's the flavor of the broccoli. I think it's the texture that he struggles with. So the seaweed doesn't have any difficulty in the texture for him, but the broccoli hits his mouth and he's gagging.
So my question to you is, has he tried something like a kale, like maybe like a kale chip that has some texture similar to seaweed?
That's a great suggestion. And we haven't tried kale chips yet. We should try that.
Because that's a nice green vegetable. And again, I'm thinking of things that have textures that are similar to the ones that they like. My kids aren't the biggest fans of cooked vegetables. So I've learned to let them eat raw vegetables. Does your picky kid, would he eat like a cucumber or a piece of celery or raw carrots, or not really?
Not really.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so it's more of an I see it and, it's difficult. So for some families, they feel like, well, you're going to eat it whether or not you like it. You don't have to like it. And we try this. But when we have one child that we really have to watch her diet, and we have to respect the boundaries of when she says, Mom, I can't eat, when she can't eat something or her body doesn't want something, sometimes it's because it makes her sick. Yeah. So we have this delicate balance of, we can't push one child so differently to eat something that they don't like when we aren't doing it with the other child, because they might not completely understand the nuanced dance that we have to do with the other one. So I know some people are like, well, probably thinking, we'll just make them eat it, right? Like just have them sit at the table. But it doesn't work with a very strong-willed child. We've learned that, you can't just force it. And B, we have to manage something differently in our family than the old school way of doing things that parents did in the past.
Oh my goodness, Janice. I'm so glad you said that because, again, I am not a dietitian. I am not a nutritionist, but I totally agree with that. When you have kids, and I had a kid that had severe sensory issues, and they would starve themselves before they would eat something that they deemed not safe. And not safe could be not safe because they didn't like the flavor. This kid looked at bowls of ice cream until they were 5 years old and wouldn't try it because they were so afraid to try ice cream. So I really do. My heart aches for you because I understand what that's like. And you can't have that battle of the wills with the kids. It creates havoc in the home and it reduces the peace, and it makes dinner time something that is not a place where your family wants to be. And that's not the goal. The goal is to have the family dinner table a place that is comfortable. I want to ask about the flavors. Clearly, your family probably likes Asian flavors because they lived in Asia for a while. Tell me about the kind of flavors that your family likes. You said they will eat lasagna, so Italian flavors are probably safe. Tell me about the kind of flavors.
Garlic is a good flavor in our house. And you're right, Asian flavors. So, soy and ginger and those things are flavors that we're comfortable with in our house. Funny enough, my family the kids don't really eat a lot of American snack foods. Like we'll eat tortilla chips. And one kid just learned about Fritos and thinks those are the greatest thing. But, a lot of the crackers and snack foods, they don't eat because they're a little bit sweet. And I think they really like more savory foods when they're eating foods. Like they love treats, don't get me wrong. But when they're eating food, they like it to be more savory based. And so I think that gives you a little bit of an idea of their palates as well.
So a sweet and sour dish probably is not going to go over as well because they're going to detect that sweet right away. And they're going to say, I don't like this.
Yes.
So you're looking for meals that are more savory, that are nut-free and chickpea and pea-free, but ways of getting more vegetables in that everyone else will eat.
Yes, that's exactly the goal.
Okay. Well, I have a few ideas. How is your family with textures of things like soups? My family doesn't like soup very much. Does your family like soup?
If it's a thick soup like cream of broccoli, no. But if it's a broth-based soup like Japanese ramen, yes. So I think if it's broth-based, I have more flexibility.
And you already said the one kid doesn't like salads. Is your family expecting a hot meal, or would they ever do things that are cold for dinner? I'm trying to think of ways to give you little bits of breaks.
Yeah, I think they would be fine with cold. I think it's more the savory versus sweet thing than cold, but I just don't have any cold ideas.
So if you can have like a sun butter or a wow butter. Is that something that you can have in your home?
Yep. Yep. So we use sunflower butter. Yeah.
Have you ever thought about doing like a cold noodle and chicken dish where you have like the cold soba noodles with some type of sauce that's made with a little bit of soy and some of that sun butter and some of that wow butter, and maybe even add in some shredded carrots? Carrots aren't green, they're orange. Now, those may add some sweet, so it may not be the best thing, but it might be something to try, or you serve the shredded carrots on the side. Is that something that your family would eat cold, do you think, maybe?
I think that's definitely worth a try. And I try, and it's like, that's great because I can use leftover chicken.
Exactly. And that gets into that cook once, eat twice kind of philosophy. Do you roast chickens a lot, or do you ever cook extra chicken meat and have it in your freezer?
I do cook extra chicken meat, but usually I season it one way for a chicken and rice dish, and then I just keep it for individual meals later on. So I don't cook it usually in a way that's versatile.
Okay, that's one thing that may change your life is when I roast chickens in my house, I usually season them pretty neutral. Like you could even go as neutral as salt and pepper only. And when I cook a chicken, I usually roast 3 for my family of 6 because it only takes a couple minutes more to prep, and it's going to take another half an hour, 45 minutes in the oven because they're a little bit tighter. But then we eat the one chicken in our family. I'm feeding 6. So we eat an entire chicken the first night, but then I pull all the meat off those chicken bones and I put them into meal-sized portions for my family and put them in the freezer. Then I take all the bones and I throw them in my crock pot and I make the broth. And so you could have that leftover chicken meat to make some of those noodle dishes with the leftover chicken. You could throw it into soups, and then you have the broth. Have you ever made bone broth?
Yes. So I make a version of bone broth into what is my closest attempt to make Japanese ramen. So it's also better because if I cooked 3 at once, then I'd have enough bones to make more broth, right? And usually I'm waiting to accumulate enough chicken.
Right. So then it's kind of a win-win-win. So that's one of my biggest suggestions for you is to try and roast 3 whole chickens at the same time. And then you can have a little bit of a break. Do you have a large slow cooker?
I do.
In my slow cooker, I can get 2 to 3 chickens worth of broth, and it makes like several quarts of broth. I've also made chicken broth in my Instant Pot, but I find that the broth gets richer in my slow cooker. Have you used an Instant Pot to make broth versus a slow cooker?
Honestly, I was doing the broth on the stove because we didn't have a slow cooker overseas. And so I was just used to doing things on the stove. And so I haven't really gotten back into the slow cooker, but I do have a large one. And I just really haven't looked at how long I need to cook it for. I was curious if it would change the flavor from the stove to the slow pot.
Well, here's a couple of tips about bone broth. And I'm not as familiar with the Japanese ramen tradition, but a couple of tips that I have found to make the broth richer. And my understanding of Japanese ramen is that the broth is very, very rich and very flavorful. You're nodding. Is that correct?
Yes.
I roast my bones. After I've taken all the meat off the bones, I put them into my oven just on a sheet pan and let them roast until they kind of get a deep golden brown. And that helps enhance the flavor. Then I take the bones and I put them in my slow cooker and I cover them with water. And you could add any of the traditional seasonings that you would put into a ramen broth. I usually just put in carrot, celery, and onion, but if there's spices and flavorings that you put into a ramen broth, you could add that then. And then I put the slow cooker on high until it just starts to boil, and then I turn it down to keep warm, not even low, but keep warm and let it go until I'm cleaning up dinner the next night. So it cooks for about 24 hours. And you end up with this really rich, deep, it almost looks like beef broth. It's so dark and brown, but it's rich and super, super flavorful. And I didn't touch it all day. And I just let my slow cooker go all day. And you could do that, especially if it's something that your family really likes. It's a real hands-off way to make your broth. Would that be helpful for you?
That's super helpful because it's a hands-off way. To my family, it's a treat if I make it. And there's a pork one, there's a chicken one. I make the chicken the most because it's easiest, but to be able to make that meal a hands-off meal would be very helpful to me.
Well, then I think that's your biggest tip and your biggest takeaway for today is how to make chicken. And then start thinking, and as you're looking at recipes, because we all kind of look at recipes sometimes, start thinking of things that you can do that are cold. And what I like about doing things that are cold is it kind of changes our brain a little bit. We're still in winter right now as we're recording this, but as you transition into spring and summer, that's usually when you kind of start bringing in new recipes and you start thinking about new things. And if you can think of things that are cold, a lot of times picky eaters will try foods that they wouldn't in a hot form because they're cold. And so you can say, hey, it's a new recipe. But I talked about this in a podcast a couple of weeks ago, is when you're trying new recipes, you either want to keep familiar ingredients or familiar flavors. You don't want to change everything in one recipe. Let me kind of give an example of that so that our listeners can hear is you don't want to go from hot ramen, which is something that has Asian flavors, to something that is cold, like a chicken salad that is sweet and has dried cherries in it, because you're going to go from something that is very, very familiar to something that is very unfamiliar. But if you go from hot ramen to a cold dish that has Asian flavors, then you're kind of keeping some of the same ingredients, you're keeping some of the same flavors, but you're changing up the temperature. Sometimes when you just do the simplest thing of changing up the temperature, picky eaters will try things. Another little tip that I learned from a dietitian years ago, and again, I'm not a dietitian, but it's a tip that I learned, was that I would often just put a little bit on the plate and say, you do not have to eat it, but you get to look at it throughout the meal. And my pickiest child is now eating things that I cannot believe they eat. Like, this kid loves onions now, and they would not touch a vegetable. They would not touch anything that was crunchy in any way. And now onions is one of their favorite things. And it kind of came out of nowhere. So that's my encouragement to you, because your kids are still pretty young. They're in that age, they're in the school age thing where they still have time to develop their palates. And just looking at it, when there's no expectation of them eating it and no expectation of that, sometimes eventually they might try a little.
Yeah, that's great. And we have to get better at it, because sometimes we just don't, because we don't want to have the argument. But if we just put it on the plate with the expectation of you just have to look at it, you just have to tolerate it being there, at least it's progress. At least it's now part of, because we both know with textures in food, like getting comfortable with it is part of the process to get them eventually to eat it.
Oh my goodness. With kids with sensory issues, getting comfortable with it is the biggest hurdle to get over. Once they get comfortable with it, then it gets even better. I've even had people say, if you can just get them to lick it, you are winning as a mom. And for me, I'm like, I don't even make them lick it. I just make them look at it.
Yeah.
like that's the rule in our home. Well, we're kind of winding up here. Before we go, are there any other questions or anything you want to ask me that I might be able to help you with before we close up?
No, I just want to say, I really like this new perspective of like just changing one aspect of the food, of the meal, because that gives me more variety to work with. So it's not presenting my kids with a completely new option that totally changes their palate, but I'm going to focus on the flavor and then find ways to change the rest of it. I think that will be a great way to incorporate some new things that we might all enjoy.
Well, good luck. And I will follow up with you to see how it goes, because I always want to hear how new ideas can help families just have dinner time a little bit easier, especially for you with a little less dishes. I really want to encourage you to get into that cook once and find ways to recycle those foods so that you don't have to be in the kitchen completely hands-on every night. You just have to assemble a little bit on the sides. Before we go, I want people to know that you have your own podcast and your own blog called Money, Career, and Motherhood. And it is just a gem of a podcast. I want all of you guys to look up Janice on Instagram. She is there under Money, Career, and Motherhood, and check out her blog, which is moneycareerandmotherhood.com. Janice, I am so glad we got to connect again today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I learned a lot.
Okay, well, take care. We'll talk with you soon.
Bye-bye.
That was really fun. I hope that you learned a little bit by listening to someone else's journey. I'm probably going to be doing a few more of these. Let me know what you think about these on-air coaching calls. You can join me in the Feed Your Family Tonight Facebook group at facebook.com/feedyourfamilytonight. Click the join group button. For now, friends, I hope you have a great week. Take care.